Okay, my English teacher friends, so I have another video in which I'm going to go over how my templates can really help students sustain a nice, clear, cogent line of reasoning in their writing across the expository modes. So for those that are familiar with my work, you know that sometimes I'll dive into some children's literature and bust out the board games and do some quirky things. And in this particular workshop, I'm going to use a book called The Forgetful Elephant by Templeton Moss. You can find it online for free, and there's actual audio recording. So just go and Google and type in The Forgetful Elephant, Templeton Moss, and you can have the story read to your kids, and there's all sorts of diagrams and pictures and whatnot for it. So pretty cool. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the story, I'll give you the general synopsis of it. So Patrick the elephant is very forgetful, and as we know, elephants have really good memories. And he's madly in love with his girlfriend, and he keeps promising her these great dates, and their anniversary is coming up, but he stands her up all the time because he just forgets that he made promises to her to take her out on dates, and he promised her that he would honor their anniversary with a really nice night out on the town. So he's just a very forgetful elephant. So what he does is he ties ribbons around his trunk in the hopes of remembering things, but his memory's so bad he forgets even though he puts ribbons on his trunk. So he goes around asking everybody, hey, why did I put this ribbon on my trunk? And ultimately he says, aha, it's because I have to take my girlfriend out for our anniversary tonight. And in terms of what I'm going to do with this, right? So just quickly here, in my template of the syllogistic method, you have the first premise, second premise, and conclusion. And for those of you that are new to my templates, I'll go over them in just a second. But I always talk about how the first premise is a promise. You're promising your reader to argue certain points, whether it's literary analysis, rhetorical analysis, straight up argument, persuasion, synthesis, or research. All expository modes are an active argument. So you're arguing certain things. And in order to sustain that line of reason, you have to keep your promise. So this is going to be interesting. I call it the red ribbon trick, keeping the promise of the first premise. For the purposes of this video, just to have a wider audience, I'm going to show you an argument paper that I'm currently working on with my on-level juniors, and then some poems that I'm doing with my seniors. So you'll get a sense of how to do it kind of sort of across the expository modes in terms of what happens in that first premise. So the other day in my YouTube channel, I posted a video that's a really great argument essay focusing on Steve Cutt's short film called Mobile World. And if you want, you can go back and check that out just to quickly encapsulate what my students are going to be writing about, so you have a sense of what their exemplars are pointing to. Here's the prompt. It says, in Steve Cutt's short film entitled Mobile World, he makes a rather unique social commentary about the American value system with regards to our mobile devices. So students can defend his thesis, qualify, challenge, or refute. So we talk about authorial intent a lot in my class. So they're going to defend his exigence, his thesis, qualify, challenge, refute his position in your response, give very specific textual support to build your argument. So this is structured just like an FRQ3 on the AP Lang exam. I'm not doing it with my AP Lang students. I'm doing it with just Gen Ed juniors, but it's structured the exact same way as an FRQ3 because it's just a straight up nuts and bolts argument paper. So as always, to really get students to write well, I really think that teachers need to Bob Ross their instruction. And what I mean by that is get to the proverbial easel and canvas and paint a whole bunch of models and exemplars with and for your students. It really demystifies the process. So what you're going to see in these exemplars and models is the byproduct of me having written like 5 syllogisms for my students. I wrote 5 introductions. I pause and say, all right, you've seen it 5 times. On your mark, get set, go. And during the writing workshop, I debrief all the ingredients, all the nuance of the intros and the bodies. So here's the question for this, for the Steve Cutts paper. How do I write the body paragraphs? This is principally where we're going to be concerned with the line of reason. Obviously, you know, it gets created, it gets structured in the thesis statement, the inverted or the declarative thesis, my template. But we're just going to take a look at body paragraphs. So as we know, a syllogism is basically when you argue premise, premise, conclusion. It comes from Aristotle. He ran a school called the Lyceum, in which the rich aristocratic boys would go there to learn about polemics, oration, debate, wordsmithing, word wrangling, you know, basic linguistics. And they would often grapple with these big, juicy questions like, what is justice? So if you've ever read Plato's Republic, you know that's what's addressed in all of those pages. And Aristotle wanted to know why certain students excelled at oration and polemics, and others were just kind of mediocre, and others were just meh, like not so hot. And he had a eureka moment. He said, I got it. The really good orators structure their arguments syllogistically, meaning they go mathematically, computatively, premise, premise, conclusion. So if I say premise 1, arsenic is deadly. Premise 2, my dog ate arsenic. Conclusion, my dog is going to die. Aristotle would say, yes, Christian, that's a cogent argument. That's bulletproof logic. Well done. So ultimately, what we're going to do in writing is have students go premise, premise, conclusion, and sustain this clear line of reasoning. Easier said than done. So in terms of making it into a template for the purposes of argument, the first premise is going to be an argument containing a why reason. And you can go back to the Steve Cutts video, the writing workshop, and take a look at the introductions. But basically in a declarative or inverted thesis, you're not stating why, you're only doing your rhetorical stance of defend, qualify, challenge, or refute. The first premise states the why. Why are you defending? Why are you qualifying? Why are you challenging? Why are you refuting? Right? From there, the textual support comes from the head, just like FRQ3 and Lang, right? Textual support from the noodle. The conclusion of the body paragraph, so again, not the conclusion of the essay, but the conclusion of the body paragraph, is the link back to the prompt, keep the promise of the first premise, echo the thesis. And all of this, so always, 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 a syllogistic body paragraph is you're shooting for 10 sentences, don't exceed 12 if you can. So it keeps it nice and supple, but there's plenty of space in 10 sentences to have ample and sufficient support and analysis to really hammer home an argument. So here's what we do, right? Tie it back to the elephant, the forgetful elephant. I have ribbons that I tied around the trunk of the first premise. Here's the kicker. The first premise is always going to be 3 sentences long, and that's true for every expository mode. Lit analysis, rhetorical analysis, argument, persuasion, synthesis, research. It's always going to be 3 sentences long. On the synthesis paper for the Lang exam, the College Board says your argument must be central 3 times. But I tell my kids, no matter what grade level they're in, no matter if it's AP, honors, dual enrollment, IB, it doesn't matter. Even at the college level, your argument is essential in every expository mode. So I want 3 sentences to really set up the centrality of the argument. So look how this goes here. The first sentence, all right, and this is really rudimentary, and I'm doing this for just on-level juniors that, you know, I got a lot of struggling and emerging writers in there. So they're going to refocus the thesis statement, right, and then get into their why reason within these 3 sentences. Look at the ribbons that I tie around the trunk. There's one major reason as to why Steve Cutts is correct in his depiction of the mobile world. Given the absolutely heinous violence that spawned from TikTok trends last year, his assertions are spot on. My school, to cite one example, is a perfect case in point. So what did Patrick the Elephant just promise us? What must come in the second premise if the line of reasoning is to stay intact? Well, we're going to put a ribbon around the trunk of TikTok trends, and we're going to put a ribbon around my school. So you have to talk about the mobile world, of course, because that's part of the prompt and the thesis, as it intersects TikTok trends and my school. Fourth sentence always begins the second premise. So look where this kid goes. Last year, especially during the autumn, things were completely out of hand. The month of September, to cite one example, was Trash a Bathroom Month. In Sperry High School, everything from paper towel dispensers to physical toilets were demolished. Further, kids were defecating and urinating in sinks. And then to skip forward 2 months, November was Slap a Teacher in the Face Month. And this kid's just making this up. This didn't happen to me. My favorite teacher by far, Mr. Kuhn, got walloped by an uppercut. And again, give specificity in the second premise. Be detailed, be detailed, be detailed. What is disgusting about this is that there are no helpers, just followers. As far as I could tell, no one stepped in to curtail the senseless bathroom destruction or the violence toward teachers. Several kids, at the daring of their peers, actually slapped teachers just to become TikTok stars for a shining moment. In the conclusion of the paragraph, the easiest thing to do is to tie it back to the prompt and tie it back to your thesis. So as you can see, Steve Cutts is correct. The mobile world clearly has created some pretty sick trends. All right, so that's kind of how my students will manipulate and pull the strings of my template. So go back. TikTok trends. We put a ribbon around the trunk. My school. Ribbon around the trunk. Excuse me. So all the textual support, all the textual analysis is tied to that, and the student is going 10 to 12 sentences. Okay, so earlier I talked about Bob Rossing instruction. So imagine that you're a student in my classroom. Haven't seen that once, you might be able to bust out a syllogistic body paragraph. But to really solidify and shore up your knowledge and comprehension, how about I ask this question? How do I write the next body paragraph? Here's the thing. Here's the kicker. Every body paragraph can be written syllogistically. So just do another paragraph. Tie your ribbon around your promise, around your trunk. And I gave the kids were having trouble understanding this. And I gave the following analogy, and it seemed to illuminate a lot of light bulbs above heads. I said, imagine if Tom Brady came to the line of scrimmage and said to the opponents, to the defensive line, hey, defense, in this very moment, we're going to run down 42 blue. I'm going to hand the ball to number 34, and he's running right at your left tackle through the hole for a touchdown. Down, setting right, down 42 blue, hike, hands the ball to 34. 34 goes to the left tackle in for the touchdown. And he's like, dude, I told you, right? I told you I was running that play. And basically a first premise does the exact same thing. So we're going to take 3 sentences to set it up, refocus the thesis, get anchored in the prompt, and then tie your ribbon around the trunk of your promise. There's one major reason as to why Steve Cutts' portrayal of the mobile world is 100% incorrect. Given the economic hardships in our country, GoFundMe campaigns are a perfect example of the great potential of social media. The Katrina Smithers story is an excellent case in point. So we're going to put a ribbon around GoFundMe and Katrina Smithers. Do you see what I mean? It's kind of like calling your plays to the defense, or in a game of poker, you show your cards before you drop them, right? Hey, opponents at the poker table, here are my cards. I'm taking this pot, all right? So second premise begins fourth sentence begins the second premise. I have to talk about GoFundMe and Smithers. I cannot forget that. I cannot be a forgetful elephant here. Just this past winter, Katrina Smithers lost her husband and 2 of her 4 children in a devastating house fire. Given that she and her husband were raising 4 young children, She stayed at home while he was the breadwinner. At the time of her husband's passing, Katrina learned that his life insurance policy had expired by one day, so she was left to her own devices. No home, no husband, and ginormous funeral expenses. She did not know where to turn. Fortunately, some good Samaritans came to her aid and started a GoFundMe account. TikTok videos went viral in the hopes of helping her out, and after 2 weeks, she had a new home and college expenses for her 2 kids. In fact, she received so much money that she was taken care of financially for life. End of second premise. So it's 3 sentences to set up the centrality of the argument, and then you got like 5, 6, 7 sentences to play with for textual support. Get detailed, get specific in those 5 to 7 sentences. And in the end here, bring it back to the prompt and thesis. Echo, echo, echo. So as you can see, Steve Cutt's portrayal is off. Social media isn't always bad. This is super training wheel, right? In terms of this template, we're going to take the scaffolds off and kick the training wheels to the curb as the academic year progresses. At the time of recording this video, I'm in my second full week of the academic year. So this is why it's as elementary and as basic as this, right? So as we proceed and go through my Word Study Academy, my Nuance Academy, get more familiar with the templates, we will get this to be a little more advanced. So let's do it again, right? And again, I'm just Bob Rossing my instruction here. If kids see things like 3 to 5 times during a writing workshop, then they usually can in turn crank out their paper, manipulate the template, and have the process be completely demystified. So how do you do it? How do you do this? How do you write a body paragraph for the Steve Cutt's essay? Go syllogistically. So tie the ribbon around your trunk, your promise, and refocus the thesis, and call the plays at the line of scrimmage, show your poker cards, state your promise, tie a ribbon around your trunk, however you want to call it. Steve Cutt is 100% correct in his assertions for a number of reasons. Chief among them is the scenes that play out during school fights. Instead of helping, kids merely take out their cell phones and gawk at senseless violence, which is sickening. So we're going to tie the ribbon around the trunk of school fights, and the idea that's associated to the prompt and the thesis of cell phones come out. Where are the helpers, right? Mr. Rogers would ask, where are the helpers? So that's what we have to talk about here. Fourth sentence, begin the second premise. So I wrote this from my own perspective. As a teacher of 20 years in the district, last year was by far and away the worst as far as school violence goes. Just in the lower Ealing alone, I helped break up 11 fights. To cite one example, 3 girls were actually curb stomping another girl. Literally, these 3 girls were kicking, hitting, and slapping a defenseless girl who was knocked out unconscious on the ground. Not only was she out cold, but she was bleeding extensively from the mouth, head, and nose. In spite of this, no one intervened. Instead, every single kid in the hallway had their cell phones out and was gawking at the spectacle like it was amusing entertainment, like a cartoon or comedy. All right, so I got like 5 sentences of that. I detailed it. It's pretty specific. So go back to the prompt and thesis. Steve Cutt is so right. The mobile world has created such a reality, and quite frankly, it's disgusting. Man is cut off from man, and we've lost our humanity. So the ribbon, helps keep the students stay focused, right? Helps them keep the promise, helps them not forget in the midst of the writing process. Oftentimes students forget where they're going, they lose direction, they get wayward, they bloviate, they get super plot summative, they abandon the paragraph too soon, or they go on too long, etc. So for my literature friends, let's take a look at Sonnet 130, My Mistress's Eyes Are Nothing Like the Sun. The only thing that changes in literary analysis is that it's an argument, but you have to use your terms and devices, right? Because it's literary analysis. So we want to hear some literary terms and devices. Second premise changes because we have a text. So it's still textual support, but instead of our heads, we're going to quote and paraphrase from the actual sonnet. So we want to teeter-totter balance that out. Don't do one more at the expense of the other. Conclusion, echo links, promise. Again, syllogistic body paragraphs, always shooting for 10 sentences. So first premise, 3 sentences. By contrasting his own humbling and humanizing diction to the typical motifs of other poets, Shakespeare brings his mistress back down to earth and basically says this: she's just an ordinary woman, but she is my woman. His tone up until the ending couplet is almost cheeky as he playfully pokes fun of his other fellow poets. In taking this approach, he deviates from convention while nonetheless giving expression of his love and adoration. All right. Where do we put our ribbons, right? What must we talk about now? We made some promises here. So we got to analyze the tone. We got to analyze the couplet and this overall motif or theme that Shakespeare is not going to use these cliched metaphors and similes of, my mistress's eyes are like the sun, right? We're not going to do what other poets do, always deifying their girl to the natural elements, to the ethereal deities, right? So we're just going to humanize our girl and say she's beautiful nonetheless. She's a human being, but she's beautiful nonetheless. And there's nothing ethereal about her at all. She's just a girl, right? Just a woman. So it's Shakespeare's playful kind of poking the ribs at his contemporaries, that came before him and during his generation of sonneteer. So we're 3 sentences in. 4th sentence begins the second premise. Right from the onset, Shakespeare rejects convention and suggests that his mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. So you begin quoting, paraphrasing right in the 4th sentence. Quote, analyze. Oftentimes in poetry, poets will juxtapose their lovers to the natural elements in order to voice their undying affection. Is this quote, all right, tied to what we promised up here? Yeah, man, we talked about that first. So we're going to talk about that first right here. So the red ribbon is helping us to sustain the focus of this. All right. So moving forward, oftentimes in poetry, poets will juxtapose their lovers to the natural elements in order to voice their undying affection. Shakespeare, on the other hand, is going in the total opposite direction. He even goes so far as to say that his mistress has bedhead, and that if her hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head, right? So again, we're getting all of this. So the quotes and paraphrases are going to be germane to the ribbons we tied around the trunk, so that we remember we must talk about these things in our textual support and our textual analysis. So far, all the quotes, all the paraphrases are germane to what we promised, to what we are trying to remember to do in our analysis. Not only is she such an earthbound woman as to suffer from this malady, but she also suffers from morning breath. Shakespeare doesn't even say it eloquently. He just unloads it on the reader by informing us that unlike other poets who assert their lover's breath is as refreshing as perfume, he says that his mistress has morning breath when she awakes and that it reeks. All right, so we have tons of support and analysis in here. Again, keep it about 5, 6, 7 sentences. Conclusion, all back to the thesis, all back to the prompt. So as you can see, Shakespeare took a very different approach to convey his love. By breaking from tradition, he neither deified his girl nor ascended her to the heavens, but he does nonetheless love her with all of his heart. And again, all taking about 10 to 12 sentences to do that. That's what we call, Aristotle called cogency. Right? Bulletproof logic, be mathematic, be computative, and just really keep your promise. Remember what you promised in the first premise. Tie a ribbon around it and just go methodically through. I have one more poem that I'm working on with my seniors called Flashcards by Rita Dove. And we'll do the exact same thing. Argument anchored in terms and devices, going to be 3 sentences to comprise that first premise. Second premise, textual support, teeter-totter balance the quoting and paraphrasing. Conclusion, echo, links, promise, all 10 to 12 sentences. So students often ask, where do I begin my analysis in the first body paragraph? And I say, be chronological, have a sequence, start where the author starts. So look at the transition here. Right from the onset, Dove introduces the central conflict by placing the setting in the past tense. Further, the contrasting clauses that characterize the narrator versus the father highlight this tension. To further accentuate the dynamic between the two principal characters, Dove introduces a series of corollary metaphors to illustrate just how harmful and toxic the relationship is. So what I do is have my students actually put ribbons around their trunks. So let's do this here. We got conflict, we got setting, we got characterization, and then the other thing we have to talk about are these metaphors. We should go in that order if we're going to have a chronology and a sequence. So let's see. We talked about, how the conflict and the setting all get captured with this syntactical maneuver, right? So this is what I mean by multitasking a first premise. Instead of students doing one paragraph tone, one paragraph diction, one paragraph syntax, they have to begin to see how the pieces unify and tie with each other, how they jigsaw piece together. So we're basically tackling 3 lit terms all in one fell swoop. So we have to find the best quote for that or the best paraphrase and just check it off our list. Keep our promise. So immediately we are told that the narrator was the whiz kid. The use of the past tense verb coupled with the corresponding imagery lets us know that when Dove was doing mathematical equations that featured apples and oranges, she was the master. Why are we doing this? Why is this perfect? Because we put a ribbon around the trunk right here. We have to. Our quotes need to be germane. Right? Our quotes and paraphrases need to link and all tie back. I promised you, dear reader, that I would say something in particular. I'm going to argue a certain point. So therefore, you have to honor your promise, right? You had a ribbon around that sucker, right? So just keep it consistent and then just go in order of the promise. To contextualize the poem, the last line gives the daughter's age, but is also an invocation or a plea for help. 10, I kept saying, I'm only 10. 10 is a double entendre because on one hand, it represents the random guess of the flashcard. It also simultaneously is a plea to the father to pump his brakes, given that the daughter is only 10 years old. Syntactically, in the first stanza, this tension is captured. In the second sentence, what comes before the semicolon captures the father's persistence and militaristic nature, while what follows captures the frantic rhythm and flow of being drilled night after night. All right, so why are we focused on syntax and why are we doing that? Because we put a ribbon around that trunk up in here. So we're good, we're cruising. So we still have some more things to get to. Not being able to meet expectations can isolate a child, and we see this in the imagery of the second stanza. Why are we doing this? Because we put a ribbon around the imagery, right? Introduces a series of corollary metaphors to illustrate just how harmful and toxic the relationship is. So that was the last thing we promised. So the metaphors is the last ribbon. So let's see where this goes. The singular word one is repeated in order to bring this idea to life. The narrator is juxtaposed to the lonely geranium and the one clear bee sputtering at the wet window pane, struggling to escape the pressure of underperformance. The reference to the tulip tree that always dragged after heavy rain also correlates to the narrator in that there's no joy in her walk from school to home. Now we're at the conclusion. Echo that thesis, go back to the prompt, full circle. Clearly, the expectations of the father are having quite a negative impact on his daughter. Largely unbeknownst, home is not a fun place to be, neither is school for that matter. So again, 10 to 12 sentences, keep those promises, tie the ribbon around the trunk, and then just go in order, right? Go in order of how you promised it. So that's the end of this particular lesson on line of reasoning. hopefully you found it to be useful and can use it with your students to kind of edify them on how to manipulate my templates and pull the strings of my templates, and have them structure their essays in a nice, cogent, cohesive manner. So also know that my Teach It Right 5-week mastermind is now being endorsed and run by the National Writing Project. So what we're going to be doing is meeting on Sunday nights throughout the academic year for 5 consecutive weeks. So we'll go from 7 Eastern Standard Time to 8 Eastern Standard Time for 5 consecutive weeks. That's 5 hours, but the cool thing is, for you guys needing some PD hours, NWP awards a completion badge of 10 hours for this course. So that's pretty cool. So it comes with my textbook, and you'll be well versed in my templates, my alternative grading methods, my Plato's Plato discussion, and it comes with a massive reservoir of writing workshops, content, handouts, lesson plans, to really lessen your workload, and it's all really good content. So if you want more information on that, you can visit my website at www.teachinghowtowrite.com, or you can reach out to me at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. So be well for now. Happy teaching and happy writing.